Stand firm, you do not know what you are about to see. Cajamarca, 1532. A sepulchral silence covers the square. A man raises his arm and traces on the stone the height of his destiny, gold up to that mark. But that day an empire did not fall. It had been crumbling since long before, when Huayna Capac closed his eyes. The Tahuantinho cracked. His children Haskar and Atahualpa did not only dispute a crown, they split armies, divided courts, confronted entire provinces, and then they arrived 168 men who would change the destiny of a continent. But they did not do it alone. This is the true history of how Spain forged a new world over the ashes of the greatest empire of the Andes. And if you want to discover all the secrets of this incredible feat, subscribe now because this story is just beginning. Year 1523, after years of brutal campaigns in the north, the Sapa Inca Inc. returns to Cusco. The sacred city receives him with fervor, the nobles, the priests. The representatives of the four suyos congregate to honor the conqueror who had extended the borders of the empire to regions that had never felt the weight of the Mascaypacha. He had submitted the Chachapolis, the Cañaris, the Aramises. He had crushed with brutality the rebellion of the Caranques in Quito, whose memory remained marked as Huarcococha, the lake of blood, where thousands of prisoners were executed. The empire shone in its zenith, however. The scene guards an unsettling secret. The Guaynapac that returns is not the same one that left. He returns victorious, certainly, but also marked by disease, and most enigmatically, when he enters Cusco accompanied by his generals, few know that in reality Huayna Capac has already died. The news has been hidden to avoid the immediate outbreak of internal struggles. In the capital, his children Haskar and Manco Inca await him. In the north, in Tumipampa, another of his favorites remains. Atahualpa. The seed of discord is already sown. The empire meant literally the four united parts. Chinchayso towards the north, Colasuyo towards the south, Antisuyo towards the jungle, and Contuyo towards the coast. Cusco was the navel, the sacred center of that vast mosaic. Huaynac, conscious that governing was balancing forces, chose his wives so that the four suyos were represented. With Mama Rahua he had Huascar, destined for the throne of Cusco. With Mama Runtu was born Manco Inca, who would play a crucial role. With Añascol he had Paulu Inca, future collaborator of the Spaniards, and with Toctopaya he begot Atahualpa, whom he would show special affection. This distribution was pure political strategy. Each marriage ensured regional alliances. The problem was evident. With so many children by different mothers, successory disputes were guaranteed. After the departure of Huayna Capac, the threads of intrigue tightened. His mummified body was moved to Cusco as if he were still alive. Because in the Andean worldview, death did not mean disappearance. The mummified Incas continued living, participating in ceremonies and in political life. Atahualpa built a palace in Tumipampa to house the remains of his father, a gesture loaded with symbolism, for only a Sapa Inca could maintain the official cult to an ancestor. With this, he intended to reinforce his legitimacy against Haskar. Haskar was proclaimed in Cusco, but his government began badly. He attempted to put an end to the system of panacas that maintained the mummies of past Incas with enormous state resources. His proposal to bury them definitively was received with indignation. The nobles considered it a sacrilege. Haskar became deeply unpopular. Atahualpa, from the north, played with cunning. He sent presents of apparent submission, but also subtly challenged the authority of his brother, according to the chronicles, when he offered gifts to Haskar. He returned them, sending him women's clothing, a humiliation intended to show him as unworthy. That affront sealed the irreconcilable enmity. In this context, the greatness of the empire became its greatest weakness. The submitted peoples, forced to pay tribute with labor in the Mita, viewed with resentment the absolute power of the Incas. The Civil War offered many the occasion to dream of freeing themselves from the Cusqueño yoke, and then, in the middle of this fracture, they arrived. Strange men, with firearms and animals never seen. They did not find a solid block, but a world worn out by internecine struggles. Where many Caracas saw in the newcomers an opportunity to recover their privileges, Atahualpa, installed in Tumipampa, assumed with determination the role of leader. He launched himself against the rebels, confronted the Cañaris. A proud people hostile to Cusqueño domination, the war was hard and ended in disgrace for him. The Cañaris made him a prisoner. The destiny of Atahualpa seemed written, execution, but he escaped. The versions vary. Some say he bribed his captors, others that he offered riches. The most mythical version ensures that his father, the sun, transformed him into a maru, the sacred serpent, allowing him to slide out of his prison. Years later he would see himself locked up again, but then neither gold nor the gods would provide him escape. Meanwhile, the civil war was decided. Haskar was defeated and executed. Atahualpa emerged as the new absolute Sapa Inca, but the price was very high. The empire was exhausted, divided, devastated by years of fratricidal conflict. It was then that the news of those foreigners began to interest him. His generals dissuaded him at first. Better to ignore them. But the new Inca wanted to see them with his own eyes. He camped in Cajamarca waiting for the encounter. Both Pizarro and Atahualpa headed deliberately to that appointment that would change history. On November 16, 1532, in the plaza of Cajamarca, two worlds clashed. On one side, Atahualpa, surrounded by thousands of subjects, on the other a handful of men led by Francisco Pizarro. Imagine the scene. The crowd gathered around the golden litter of the Inca, and suddenly the eruption of what was never seen. The horses entered at a gallop, the muskets exploded with a deafening roar, the smoke darkened the entire plaza. The clash was brutal. The crowd fell into absolute panic. Many died crushed in the stampede, others hit by bullets. In a short time, the most numerous army of the continent crumbled before total surprise. Pizarro advanced towards the royal litter. The carriers were killed. Pizarro himself personally trapped the Inca. Atahualpa, the son of the sun, fell prisoner. In Cajamarca, not only was a king captured, the confidence of a people in the protection of their divinities was broken. Atahualpa was locked in a narrow room. The irony repeated itself. Years before he had escaped from the Cañaris, now he tried again to invoke his gods. It was said that he could transform himself into a Maru and flee, but this time the silence was his only answer. "My gods do not listen to me," he lamented. For many, that silence confirmed that in front of the Spaniards stood a more powerful god, desperate. Atahualpa offered his last card. He proposed to fill the room with gold up to the height of his extended arm. Silver would fill the adjoining room twice. The promise was excessive, but plausible. The Spaniards accepted. The entire empire mobilized from Cusco. Quito and Pachacamac caravans loaded with treasures left for a few weeks. The heart of the world was in Cajamarca. However, the delivery of the gold was not enough. Atahualpa continued to be a danger. In Cusco, the political game continued. The displaced nobles saw in Pizarro an opportunity. Secret embassies were initiated. Internal division was the true weapon of the conquest. Pizarro understood it with clarity. To reach Cusco, he needed an Inca that would support his march. Atahualpa, as a prisoner, was no longer useful. The candidate appeared: Manco Inca, son of Huayna Capac, young and with desires for power. Pizarro recognized him as legitimate Sapa Inca. Together they undertook the path towards the heart of the empire, and here's where history takes an unexpected turn. But before, subscribe to the channel if you want to know all the secrets of this incredible epic. The march towards Cusco faced obstacles. General Quisquis, loyal to Atahualpa, raised an army. The clash took place in Vilcabamba. Victory favored Pizarro and Manco. Quisquis was later assassinated by his own men. His companion Rumiñahui fought until he fell prisoner and was executed. With them, the first organized resistance was extinguished. Manco entered Cusco, accompanied by the conquerors. He was enthroned with Hispanic pomp. The alliance seemed firm. The Spaniards needed an Inca to give legitimacy. Manco needed the Spaniards to eliminate rivals. He soon understood that his dignity was decorative. He tried to leave Cusco twice. Both times he was held. He perceived treatment unbecoming of someone who held the title of Son of the Sun. That tension incubated the rebellion that would break out later. Meanwhile, in Cajamarca, the destiny of Atahualpa was being consummated. His ransom was divided among Pizarro's men and the King of Spain, but he did not regain his freedom. He was subjected to a summary trial. The accusations: idolater, polygamist, conspirator. The verdict was decided. Atahualpa was condemned. Paradoxically, he was not loved by his people. The civil war had made him unpopular. His execution did not unleash immediate rebellion. Only with time would his figure become a symbol. In the 18th century, he transformed into a tragic hero, magnified by the legend that sought to attack the Spanish work. 2 centuries later, he would be completely vindicated. The departure of Atahualpa closed a cycle and opened another. The resistance of Vilcabamba began, almost 40 years of intermittent war. It was a complex time where neither one nor the other achieved absolute victory. The Andean world disappeared in Cajamarca. It transformed. The absolute power of the Sapa Inca was broken, but not the vitality of the Andean peoples. The Spaniards inherited roads, warehouses, work systems, and power networks that they adapted to the Hispanic imperial order. Manco Inca occupies an ambiguous place in memory. For some he was a puppet, for others every step obeyed a meditated plan. The truth is that he represents better than anyone the tension between collaboration and resistance. In prison, Manco promised Pizarro to bring enough gold. He spoke of the statue of Huayna Capac filled with gold. The Spaniards released him, but Manco left Cusco and raised the banner of the insurrection. He soon discovered that the great Andean lords would not follow him. On the contrary, many joined the Spaniards. Peoples like the Huancas, Cañaris, or Chachapolas had suffered decades of burdens under the Mita. The promise of freeing themselves from that oppression made them incline in favor of the newcomers. The resistance of Manco was born fractured. Despite everything, he launched himself into combat. He summoned his generals in Calca and presented an audacious plan to besiege Cusco, expel the Spaniards, and restore the greatness of the Tantinsuyo. The first scenario was the fortress of Sacsayaman, key to dominating Cusco. Manco launched his troops. The battle was ferocious, thousands died. But the siege on the city was maintained. Inside, the Spaniards resisted desperately. The reinforcements left from Lima. But the rout was a rosary of defeats. Troops under the command of several captains were defeated by the generals of Manco. The situation seemed to incline towards the Incas. The rebellion reached Lima. In August 1536, Kisuyupanqui, one of Manco's most brilliant generals, initiated the siege of the capital. Simultaneously, Cusco continued to be besieged. For an instant, the Inca victory seemed inevitable. Kisu designed a pincer plan, but at this point the intrigue tipped the balance. Mama Contuacho, powerful Carissa of Guaylas and former concubine of Huayna Capac, had a daughter, Inez Huaylas Yupanqui. Mistress of Francisco Pizarro, Inez, trapped in besieged Lima, wrote to her mother asking for help. Mama Contarguacho responded by sending more than 5,000 men in aid of Pizarro. The loyalty of an indigenous family tipped the fate of the entire campaign. Kisu's attack was reckless. He penetrated the city confident, but the reinforcements arrived in time. Kisu's forces were isolated and massacred. The general himself died in combat. With his fall, the great opportunity vanished. Never again would the Incas be so close to expelling the Spaniards. Manco lost his best strategist. The siege of Cusco was lifted and the Inca fled with his followers towards the jungle of Vilcabamba. There the legend was born. Vilcabamba transformed into the secret capital of a ghost empire. It was not a lavish center, but a refuge between mountains and jungles. For more than 2 decades, the Spaniards tried to conquer it without success. Vilcabamba survived thanks to its geography and the will to resist. It was less a city than a symbol. The last redoubt of the Tao Antinuyo, Manco, from that exile, constantly harassed the Hispanic forces. His incursions forced to secure intermediate routes like the foundation of Huamanga, conceived as a bastion against the jungle attacks. Destiny wanted Manco to survive his greatest enemies. In 1541, Francisco Pizarro was assassinated in Lima by partisans of Diego de Almagro the Younger. 3 years later, the same assassins sought refuge in Vilcabamba. Manco welcomed them, perhaps seeing them as instruments for his cause. It was a fatal error. The refugees conspired against him and eliminated him by treason. With his departure, the last great military leader of the resistance went out. The witness passed to his son Sayuri Tupac. Barely a 5-year-old child, too young to lead a war, he was the object of political maneuvers. In 1548, he accepted to move to Yucay, where he received lands and privileges in exchange for his conversion to Christianism. He was succeeded by Titusi Yupanqui, who tried to retake the confrontation. He reinstalled the court in Vilcabamba and maintained a tense relationship with the authorities. His departure, due to illness, was unfairly attributed to the Augustinian friars who attended him. Those close said they had poisoned him, and as punishment they were brutally eliminated. The last chapter of the resistance was spiritual. In the decade of 1560, the movement of the Takianoi arose, which could be translated as the dance of the trance. Its followers claimed to be possessed by the Huacas, the ancestral gods who returned indignant. It was a desperate attempt to reanimate the Andean cosmos. Facing the expansion of the Christian faith, the Spanish authorities responded with hardness. They considered the Takiankoi a dangerous heresy and persecuted its leaders for a decade. The movement was finally smothered. Give like to the video if you are enjoying this epic story. The weight of history fell on one last man. In 1571, a young prince was raised as heir of an extinguished greatness. His name was Tupac Amaru. Without scepter and without a powerful army, he became the last of the Incas of Vilcabamba. The viceroy Francisco de Toledo had understood that peace could not exist while an independent redoubt subsisted. Vilcabamba was a dangerous anachronism. At first he tried the diplomatic path. He sent emissaries with proposals for negotiation, but in the jungle the emissaries were received with suspicion. Tupac Amaru and his people interpreted his visits as espionage. The response was brutal. The envoys were eliminated. That error sealed the destiny of the resistance. In 1572, Toledo declared war officially. To lead the campaign, he sent Martín García Oñez de Loyola, who years later would reach renown in Chile. The expedition penetrated the Amazonian thickness with Castilian discipline. Tupac Amaru, without forces for a field battle, went into the jungle. For days he lived in flight. His purpose was no longer to win, but to survive. The persecution culminated with his capture. He was taken with strong custody to Cusco, already a prisoner. Tupac Amaru was baptized by friars of Our Lady of Mercy in Cusco on September 24, 1572. The Viceroy Toledo ordered his execution. He was accused of having put to death the royal emissaries. an unforgivable crime against the crown. The voices of protest arose. The Bishop of Popayan, followed by many priests and friars, went to the viceroy. They knelt and begged him for mercy. They urged that he be sent to Spain to be judged by the king, but no prayer prevailed. Toledo maintained his sentence. Seeing in the death of Tupac Amaru the only way to definitely close the cycle of resistance, the execution was public. Thousands of indigenous people witnessed the scene. Silence weighed on the plaza when the young descendant of Huayna Capac was taken to the block, where the executioner, a Cañari Indian, awaited him. It is said that he maintained dignity until the end. With his death, not only a man was extinguished, but an institution that had ruled the Andes for centuries. The execution of Tupac Amaru provoked commotion. For many Spaniards, it was an excess. For the indigenous, it was the sign that the time of the Incas had concluded. From then on, Vilcabamba ceased to exist as an independent enclave, but history did not end there. The name of Tupac Amaru transformed into a myth 200 years later. José Gabriel Condorcanqui, descendant of Inca nobles and mestizo of Spanish blood, adopted that name to lead the Great Rebellion of the 18th century. He became Tupac Amaru II, leader of an insurrection that lit up the Andes and shook the viceroyalty. Paradoxically, the rebels of the 18th century fought against a legacy of which they were also part. They were mestizos, subjects of the crown. They spoke Spanish, they practiced Catholicism, and, nevertheless, they raised the banner of the Incas. The conquest of the Tahuantinsuyo did not end on the battlefield. After the military campaigns and the execution of Tupac Amaru I, a decisive process began. The integration of the Inca nobility to the Hispanic order, far from disappearing. Many main houses of Cusco knew how to adapt. The descendants of Guaynac, Hascar, Atahualpa, or Manco Inca were not erased. They went on to occupy a recognized place in the new viceroyal society, linking with conquerors, obtaining noble titles, and assimilating Hispanic institutions. The Spanish monarchy understood that it needed the legitimacy of the Inca nobility. To guarantee stability, it was essential to integrate the native elites, transform their prestige into support of the new order, and offer them a dignified place. Thus, while some Incas died in battle, others were recognized as hidalgos and gentlemen of Castile. This double path, resistance and assimilation, defined the destiny of Peru. One of the most notorious examples was Doña Inés Huaylas Yupanqui, daughter of Huayna Capac. After the capture of the Inca in Cajamarca, she became a companion of Francisco Pizarro. From that union was born Francisca Pizarro Yupanqui, considered the first noble mestiza of Peru, recognized by the crown. Francisca enjoyed rents coming from encomiendas and mines. She moved to Spain, the direct fusion of Inca and Spanish blood. Another central figure was Beatriz Clara Coya, daughter of Sayuri Tupac. She was married to Martín García de Loyola, the same one who had captured Tupac Amaru. Her daughter, Ana María Lorenza de Loyola Coya, inherited titles and lands. In 1611, she contracted marriage in Madrid with Juan Enriquez de Borja. Thus, the blood of the Incas joined with one of the most influential families of Europe. These links were not exceptions. In all the Andean territory, marriages multiplied between conquerors and Iñustas or Inca princesses, generating a mestizo nobility recognized by the crown in 1545. Charles V instituted in Cusco the position of royal standard-bearer of the Incas, granted to Cristobal Poinza. This ceremonial position symbolized the continuity of the Inca prestige within the new order. In 1697, Charles II dictated the celebrated royal decree of honors that equated the main caciques with the hidalgos of Castile. Don Melchor Carlos Inca, descendant of Huayna Capac, traveled to Spain and obtained in 1627 the habit of Knight of the Order of Santiago. In this way, the Inca lineage not only survived, but found a new legal framework within the Hispanic monarchy. Many descendants did not limit themselves to Peru. Several families traveled to the peninsula to claim rights. In Valladolid, Madrid, or Seville, lawsuits were presented where the Inca lineages were recognized as part of the Castilian nobility. Francisca Pizarro Yupanqui lived in Trujillo, Extremadura. Surrounded by privileges, her descendants integrated into the local nobility. The Loyola Borgia branch consolidated the fusion of Inca and European royal blood, coming to boast the Marquisate of Santiago de Oropesa. When the weapons fell silent and the alliances were consolidated, another chapter began, the shared daily life. The conquest had fractured a world, but the viceroyalty raised another. Woven with threads of two traditions, Spaniards and Incas were no longer enemies. Now they shared trades, houses, marriages, devotions, and ways of imagining beauty. In that miscegenation was born the reality that still throbs in Peru and in all Hispanic America. Cusco became the best mirror of this fusion. From the first years of the viceroyalty, the architecture evidenced the alliance between the European tradition and the Andean ingenuity. The Spaniards traced cities following the Castilian model, with main squares flanked by cathedrals and palaces. But those constructions adopted local materials and techniques that imprinted a stamp of their own. The indigenous carvers, heirs of a thousand-year-old tradition, learned from Spanish masters to work the vault, the arch, and the column. The result was astonishing. In the process, they created a unique style, the Mestizo Baroque. It was not a copy of Europe, nor an isolated Inca persistence, but a perfect synthesis of both. The convent of Santo Domingo erected over the Coricancha showed in every corner that dialogue of memories, the European Baroque found in the Andes' fertile ground to reinvent itself. The brushes of mestizos and indigenous filled the canvases of virgins and angels with skies that recalled the brightness of the Sierra. In the churches of the high plateau, the gold altarpieces shone next to cherubs with Andean features. The most astonishing case was the Cusqueña school of painting, born in the 18th century, a movement where Western tradition converged with the Andean vision to forge a new style. Angels with faces of indigenous nobility guarded altars. Virgins dressed as Castilian ladies transformed into tutelary queens of entire peoples. This incorporation was celebrated. It was the way in which the Andes embraced Catholicism without ceasing to feel like part of themselves. The Mestizo Baroque did not remain in painting. In the architecture of Arequipa, Potosí, or Ayacucho, the church portals were covered with Andean flowers carved in stone. Local birds and faces that seemed to have come from the royal panacas. It was a new language. A way of saying that the Hispanic American order transformed and elevated the pre-Hispanic legacy. If the stones showed the miscegenation, the parties did more. The viceroyal calendar was full of Christian and Andean celebrations. The Corpus Christi procession in Cusco became a monumental appointment that is still celebrated today. Each parish goes out with its saints on litters accompanied by dances, music, and banners. The Catholic images marched through the same streets where the mummies of the Incas were once paraded for this festivity. The descendants of the Inca nobility carried the litters of the Virgin or of Santiago, dressed in their best finery. Followed by musicians who intoned native rhythms in honor of the most holy sacrament. The parties were also social. In them all the estates were mixed. The town councils of Spaniards and Andean, the merchants, the criollos, the mestizos, the viceroyalty was hierarchical. But it was also a space of encounter where differences were negotiated within the common framework of the monarchy. In the domestic sphere, the fusion was also perceived. The houses combined Castilian patios with Andean orchards. The kitchens were living proof of the miscegenation. Wheat and pork were mixed with corn, potato, and chili pepper. Thus was born a new gastronomy that still defines the identity of Peru. The textiles did not disappear either. The indigenous women continued weaving, but now with sheep's wool next to that of alpaca, and with designs that incorporated Christian crosses next to ancestral geometric symbols. The fall of the Tahuantingo did not mean the extinction of the Incas, but their transformation. What began in Cajamarca with violence concluded with the foundation of a mestizo order where the Inca and the Castilian nobility merged. The blood of Guaynapac came to be related to the Borgia in Spain. The descendants of Huáscar and Pauju recognized as hidalgos. The children of Sai and Tupac reached marquesates and knightly habits. And although the political power of the Sapa Inca disappeared, his memory became the foundation of a new identity. The Hispanic American. In this miscegenation, the Andes did not die. They were reborn under another form. Neither pure Spaniards nor isolated Incas, but both at the same time. United in a cultural synthesis that survived time and that still today defines the reality of Peru and all America, Hispanity, a civilization born from the epic encounter of two worlds that after the initial clash decided to build together something completely new. And that, friends, is the true history of the conquest of Peru, not the simple defeat of an empire, but the birth of a new civilization that still today defines us. If you have reached this point, subscribe to the channel. Activate the bell and share this video. We see each other in the next history of Spain.